Today we'll be taking a look at Playerunknown's Battlegrounds on the Potato Masher and Potato Masher Pro. In case you don't know, the Potato Masher is a series where I compare a cheap PC against the PS4. There's also the Potato Masher Pro, which competes against the PS4 Pro. The goal isn't to pick on either console, but to compare and contrast the platforms to show you what's possible with a budget PC. There are a lot of games that you've requested that I test, and I'll probably never be able to get to all of them, but if I take a few of those games and just take a brief look at how the Masher and Masher Pro perform, I can make a short video where I might not be able to make anything before. This means that for these shorter videos called Tater Tots, I won't be comparing them against a console. Links are in the description if you want more information about either the Potato Masher or the Potato Masher Pro, and let's get to it. Battlegrounds isn't out for any consoles, at least not yet. Given that it's in early access, you should expect a pretty poorly optimized experience with inconsistent performance, frequent crashes, etc. Keeping that in mind, I was actually surprised at how well Battlegrounds runs. Compared to previous open world games with similar gameplay like H1Z1, DayZ, or Arma's Epoch mod, Battlegrounds runs pretty well and it looks very respectable, although the game doesn't yet support VSync, so expect lots of tearing. For this video, I did manually lock frame rates using Riva Tuner Statistics Server. The Masher's GTX 760 is capable of 1080p, the high preset, and a locked 30 FPS. You will see occasional frame rate hitches, which is to be expected for an early access game, but overall the Masher holds steady. The high preset itself isn't an issue, but the VRAM usage is higher than I'd like, so here is high settings with just the textures set to medium. The frame rate is a little more stable and the game doesn't look much worse. At 1080p and very low settings, the Masher can hit close to a reliable 60 FPS, although towns and explosions and other events cause the frame rate to stumble a little more often. Again, this is an early access game, so I'd expect this to get a lot better before release. The game doesn't look great at the lowest settings, but the higher frame rate is nice for clutch engagements. Low settings still allow for 60 FPS most of the time, and the game gets some shadows and other basic graphical effects that do look a bit better than very low. If you had a G-Sync monitor to help balance out the more frequent frame rate drops, that wouldn't be a bad compromise. And finally, at 1440p in low settings, the Masher is also capable of a stable 30 FPS. The added sharpness is useful picking out enemies on faraway ridgelines, and it does clean up aliasing on buildings, fences, and power lines. That's all for the Masher, but how does the Masher Pro fare? Ditching the Masher's GTX 760 in favor of a GTX 1060, the Masher Pro is capable of 1080p and 60 FPS at very high settings. However, I frequently got frame rate drops into the mid-50s, so to reach a completely locked 60 FPS, I dropped the settings to high. The game looks very similar and the performance issues cleared right up. At 1440p in medium settings, the Masher Pro is capable of about 40 to 55 FPS, which is again good for a G-Sync or FreeSync monitor, but a little less stable than I'd prefer. Of course, I could drop the resolution scaling to get a locked frame rate, but Battlegrounds res scaling is a bit soft, so I left it alone. With some tweaks, a stable 30 or 60 FPS is very possible at 1440p, but moving to 4K, at medium settings the Masher Pro can lock at 30 FPS. The game looks quite a bit nicer than 1080p at these settings, even if you're super sampling onto a 1080p display. However, 60 FPS at 4K isn't possible even on very low settings. Actually, even on very low settings with 70% resolution scaling, it still isn't possible. The game looks like garbage using this particular combination of settings, so I'd stick to 1440p or 1080p if you want 60 FPS, or 4K if you're okay with 30. DayZ struggled to stay above 20 FPS in many towns after it released. H1Z1 had a host of issues. Arma is famous for its performance, largely depending on the server you happen to connect to. You want to play Altus Life? May Gaben have mercy on your GPU. I say all that not to pick on these games, but yes, performance problems are frustrating. However, open world survival games have a lot of moving pieces and optimization takes a lot of time and effort that is difficult for a small team, especially when they are crunched for time. Battlegrounds is capable of hitting 60 FPS if you have good enough hardware, and it can handle 100 players on a large map with very fast matchmaking and reasonably stable performance. I'm honestly impressed with how good it is compared to most open world survival games. Would I like it to perform better after a few patches? Yeah, of course. Do they need to add VSync? Yes, absolutely. However, even in its current state, the Masher and Masher Pro play the game better than most other games in the same genre, and the gameplay itself is a ton of fun and I highly recommend it. If you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel or supporting me on Patreon if you enjoy my content. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.